Morning, everybody. My name is Steve Daniel, and I'm a worship associate as well as a staff spouse here at Horizon Unitarian Universalist Church. We're very happy to have you here with us today, whether you're joining us in person or virtually, whether you're here for the first time or whether you've been here for longer than you can remember. Here at Horizon, we welcome people of all faiths and of no faith in particular. Whoever you are, wherever you welcome among us.
Our call to worship this morning is called In Faith, and it comes to us from the Reverend Sunshine Wolf. Sunshine writes, "This is a congregation that gathers in faith, not faith in one religion or one God or any one way. We gather in faith of the power of diversity, the power of love, and the hope of a world transformed by our care. We gather in faith in ourselves and those around us, not a faith that requires perfection or rightness in one another. Rather, a faith in our shared imperfection. We may learn to stumble and fall together. Faith that we will help one another to rise and to try again and again. So in that spirit, come, let us worship together." Our chalice lighting this morning is called Daybreak by Robin F. Gay. Day breaks on our gratitude for family and friends, for the freedom to find our own truth, for the company of those who gather here, and the promises we offer one another. Let the light of day bring the grace of faith into our lives. I invite you now to join with me in saying the words of our affirmation. Love is the doctrine of our church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in harmony with the earth. Thus do we covenant together. So this morning, for the first time in a long time, I'm going to invite you to rise in body or in spirit and to sing together our opening hymn, Morning Has Come. It's number 1000 in the Teal Hymnal.
Morning has come, arise and greet the day. Dance with joy and sing a song of gladness. The light of hope it shines upon
I've been wanting to do that for such a long time. So as we prepare this morning to collect our offering, I offer a reminder that generosity can be an expression of our faith. The offering for the ministries of this church will now be joyfully given and received.
The first reading this morning is a poem by Philip Booth entitled First Lesson. Lie back, daughter, let your head be tipped back in the cup of my hand. Gently, I will hold you. Spread your arms wide and lie out on the stream and look high at the gulls. A dead man's float is face down. You will dive and swim soon enough where this tide water ebbs to the sea. Daughter, believe me, when you tire on the long thrash to your island, lie up and survive. As you float now, where I held you and let go, remember when fear cramps your heart, what I told you. Lie back gently and wide to the light your stars. Lie back and the sea will hold you.
We come now to the time in our service for meditation and prayer. We'll share a moment of silence, hear the joys and sorrows of our community, have time for spoken prayer, and join in singing together our responsive hymn, Spirit of Life. I invite you now to join me in a moment of silence. Loving God, Spirit of life, mystery in which we live and move and have our being, draw near to us this morning and hear our prayers. We give thanks for the dawning of a new day, that with it brings the highs and the lows of life. We give thanks for the safety and comfort of our homes, the love of friends, the relative ease of so many of our lives, knowing that in many other places this morning it is otherwise. We give thanks today, too, for the opportunity to be here with people we love and with people we have not yet met, to consider what it means to be alive in today's world. This is a gift we give ourselves again and again. This morning, we also gather to lift our hearts in lament for the people of Ukraine and the people of Russia, for all the ordinary people who stand powerless as one leader wages war on another. We pray for peace and for an end to violence everywhere. Spirit of life, help us today to find a balance between worry and joy, between taking action and controlling only what we can, between all-consuming anxiety and total indifference. As we continue to live our lives filled with joy and pain, with the sacred and the mundane, nudge us, remind us that this world contains multitudes of love, if we can only see it. For all these things and others held in the silence of our hearts, we pray. Amen. I invite you now to rise, either in body or in spirit, and join in singing our responsive hymn, Spirit of Life, number 123.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. Move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Okay, our second reading this morning comes from Sharon Salzberg, a Buddhist teacher and writer. This is an excerpt from her book called Faith, Trusting Your Own Deepest Experience. And this is a long reading, so bear with me, but I promise you need every word. One day, a friend called to ask if we could meet for tea. Knowing that I was writing a book on faith from the Buddhist perspective, she was confused and wanted to talk. How can you possibly be writing a book on faith without focusing on God, she demanded. Isn't that the whole point? Her concern spoke to the common understanding we have of faith, that it is synonymous with religious adherence. But the tendency to equate faith with doctrine and then argue about terminology and concepts distracts us from what faith is actually about. In my understanding, whether faith is connected to a deity or not, its essence lies in trusting ourselves to discover the deepest truths on which we rely. For some, this will be a very different approach to faith. Many link faith to narrow-minded belief systems, lack of intelligent examination, or pain at having one's questions silenced. Faith might evoke images of submission to an external authority. Historically, the idea of faith has been used to slice cleanly between those who belong to a select group and those who do not. To fuel their own embittered agenda, fanatics harness what they call faith to hatred. I want to invite a new use of the word faith, one that is not associated with dogmatic religious interpretation or divisiveness. I want to encourage delight in the word, to help reclaim faith as fresh, vibrant, intelligent, and liberating. This is a faith that emphasizes a foundation of love and respect for ourselves. It is a faith that uncovers our connection to others rather than designating anyone as separate and apart. Faith does not require a belief system and is not necessarily connected to a deity or God, though it doesn't deny one. This faith is not a commodity we either have or don't have. It is an inner quality that unfolds as we learn to trust our own deepest experience. The Buddha said, "Faith is the beginning of all good things." No matter what we encounter in life, it is faith that enables us to try again, to trust again, to love again. Even in times of immense suffering, it is faith that enables us to relate to the present moment in such a way that we can go on, we can move forward, instead of becoming lost in resignation or despair. Faith links our present-day experience, whether wonderful or terrible, to the underlying pulse of life itself. So some of you may know, and others may not, that this is the first Sunday of Lent, I believe. I was in 3rd grade when I first learned about Lent at church in holidays and holy days curriculum. And I remember distinctly wondering all throughout the class if we were talking about the thing from the dryer, but I was just too shy. I was too shy to ask. That's such a UU story. I would soon learn that Lent is a liturgical season where Christians engage in some form of practice for 40 days to draw closer to God. A normal conversation starter in seminary this time of year would be, "What are you doing for Lent?" And it didn't take long before I got curious, and finally, in my last year, decided to take up writing as a spiritual practice. I even got this book called 40 Days of Praying with Your Pen. I wanted, I think, to try doing something ritualized and structured just to see what would happen. But that spring of 2020, of course, would blow my writing practice to pieces. What I learned, though, is that 40 days of simply paying attention can be revolutionary. Maybe the key is not always the structured practice, but training ourselves to notice the little things we'd usually allow to pass us by. In the time before, during, and after seminary, I've experienced the practice of faith across many traditions. I've been to Shabbat dinners, to Eid celebrations. I've gotten ashes from a Catholic woman called to the priesthood on Ash Wednesday. I've sat in meditation with the Buddhists, read poetry with the nuns. That's N-O-N-E-S, by the way, maybe a conversation for another Sunday this month. And I preached in the pulpit where Emerson gave his divinity school address in 1838 that was the beginning of the Transcendentalist movement. And I've learned that faith can be lived in many, many different ways, all beautiful, each with their own depth and meaning. Each one speaks what I've come to call the language of the heart. When I first started here at Horizon, I loved the warm welcome I received, the way I felt almost immediately able to connect with so many of you. The good energy here is something tangible, something I could feel right away. And despite the stresses of a pandemic and the losses that have been experienced, there is a vitality here so necessary for ministry to thrive. But one thing surprised me. I was surprised that some folks seemed to take offense at my use of the word God in my prayers, and more so in my description of my own life experience. Some were glad I've stopped using the Bible as a source, which, of course, I have not, as it's one of our 6 sources of Unitarian Universalism from which we draw our wisdom. And now, I've said before, I am a raised UU, so the fact that a group of UUs might not love the use of the word God, prayer, faith, that's not really a big revelation to me. But it was less the discomfort that gave me pause and more so the assumptions that I think were running behind it. How do any of us know what someone else might mean by the words God, religion, prayer, faith? I'm raising this topic both because it's on theme and because it's my job as your interim minister to kind of pick and push at the tough stuff we hold among us. No, this is all said in love and in care. My role is to hold up a mirror for you to see yourselves more clearly. So it is a new month, and our March Soul Matters theme is renewing faith. And for some of us, as we touched on earlier, faith might be akin to a dirty word, at the very least a word that can cause us to stumble as Unitarian Universalists. We might wonder, faith in what exactly? Maybe we think of faith as something we either have or don't have. And if we think we don't have it, we might feel like a spiritual failure. Or maybe when we hear the word, we think of blind faith, as in unthinking acceptance of a doctrine. It was these words from Frederick Buechner that first opened my eyes to a new way of looking at faith. Faith is a verb, not a noun, he says. A process, not a possession. The reality is that as Unitarian Universalists, we really are a sort of big theological tent. We each come into this place bringing our past experiences, some with other traditions. Some of us may look back at our childhood teachings on faith lovingly, while others may have felt stifled, lonely, or traumatized by the faith in which we were raised. Part of growing as a human being is acknowledging our past, letting go of the parts that didn't serve us, and moving forward with all that does. As we discussed last month, the landscape of our tradition is changing. Now our congregations are not necessarily made up of people leaving other traditions, but instead of folks who may never have been a part of a faith community, and we come hungry for something we've never had before. Either way, we've chosen to come together from different places to form this big tent. But sometimes, within the tent, we are so afraid of using what we might call religious language that we refuse to talk at all about our journeys to get where we are today. And we're afraid to wonder what it might mean to reframe the concept of God, prayer, faith. I'm sure there's other words. Let me know the other words after the service. And as I think we'll see later, when we close ourselves off from that, we're missing out on stories from others that might help us in our own development. We have to try to learn to speak the language of our hearts, to speak honestly with language that works for us, whether or not it works for others. The other reason I think we UUs can get flustered by the concept of faith is that we sometimes assume that faith, by default, refers to faith in God, as we heard earlier in Sharon Salzberg's reading. Depending on your perspective, you might be glad to know that this is actually not the case. In both Latin and Hebrew, the word for faith is a verb, an action. The same is true in Pali, the language of the original Buddhist texts. The Pali word, usually translated as faith, confidence, or trust, writes Sharon Salzberg, is sada. Sada literally means to place the heart upon. To have faith is to offer one's heart, or to give over one's heart. So the question of faith instead becomes, to what or to whom do you offer your heart? Maybe, over the past few years, the people and places and things you've been willing to give your heart to have changed, and maybe not. Either way, maybe your willingness to or desire to give over your heart to anything needs to be opened, reignited, renewed. Maybe you gave your heart to something and it hurt you. Maybe, in order to renew your faith, you need to try to heal. Maybe you need to try to trust again. And that journey is certainly not an easy one. Salzberg continues, to offer our hearts in faith means recognizing that our hearts are worth something, that we ourselves, in our deepest and truest nature, are of value. For me, faith requires truth-telling and honesty, acknowledgement of the good and bad and in between. In the words of Anne Lamott, faith includes noticing the mess, the emptiness and discomfort, and letting it be there until some light returns. If you've emailed me a lot, you might notice that I often sign my emails with the words "in faith." And when I say in faith, I mean that I am giving my heart over to our Unitarian Universalist tradition with all its beauty and all of its challenges. I'm together alongside all of you in this religious tradition. I said last week that I answered the call to ministry, and this is part of what it means. And it also means that there are times when I put my faith in all of you. Buddhist teacher Sharon Salzberg writes, "For me, faith has a lot to do with courage. And it's the courage to step forward into the unknown. And first of all, to admit we don't know, to actually admit we don't know, and yet to say, I have the strength to go forward anyway. It's connecting to our own deepest strengths, so we're not defined by this circumstance we find ourselves in on any given day." Of course, when we talk about faith, inevitably there creeps in the question of doubt. I was talking to a friend a few months ago about his kind of mainline Protestant upbringing, and he recounted to me his confirmation, going through with the ceremony despite some serious doubts. And I remember saying to him, theologians for centuries have said that doubt is an expression of faith, not a denial. Frederick Buechner writes, "Faith is better understood as a verb than as a noun, as a process than as a possession. It is on again, off again, rather than once and for all. Faith is not being sure where you're going, but going anyway. A journey without maps. Doubt isn't the opposite of faith, it is an element of faith." Anne Lamott also shares a similar story about the messiness of her journey toward faith. She writes, "My coming to faith did not start with a leap, but rather with a series of staggers from what seemed like one safe place to another. Like lily pads, round and green, these places summoned and then held me while I grew. Each prepared me for the next leaf on which I would land, and in this way I moved across the swamp of doubt and fear." There's a Nick Cave song called "Into My Arms." It begins, "I don't believe in an interventionist God." The song is kind of like a psalm in a way, a prayer sung aloud. I used it in my chaplaincy training on our final meeting day when we had to choose songs to sum up our learning over the course of the unit. And it's true. When using the word God, I certainly don't mean a man in the sky that sits on a cloud and controls everything that happens down here on earth. For one thing, I think God is beyond our human concepts of gender and personification. And though that image of the bearded man might be the God that many of us were taught to believe in, I use the word God to describe something almost beyond what I can say in words. The feeling that I get from the sunshine on my shoulders, listening to the birds sing to one another, feeling like I'm part of the larger collective heartbeat of this world. But it's also true that you might just call that a nice afternoon. Part of this is that I'm always looking to go a little deeper to find the sacred in each ordinary day, but that may not be true for every person. My husband and I were talking the other day about mountains, about some of his experiences hiking in Colorado. He said, it looks like someone just took their hands and carved out the mountains. I might call that view an experience of God, but I think his way is in fact more poetic. This understanding of one another is how we start to speak what I have come to call the language of the heart. And by that I mean that we will all have different ways of talking about an experience that takes our breath away. And whether we call it God or the universe or something else doesn't matter. But what does matter is that you're okay with the language used by your neighbor, even if it's not your own. The other factor in this, of course, that would be foolish not to name is our surroundings. We live here in the South, where many of our neighbors dominate the conversation around faith, where the term liberal religion to many can seem like an oxymoron. There are so many ways in which this is frustrating and alienating. The influence of the religious right here is felt in so many ways, and especially during the Trump presidency, evangelical Christianity became synonymous with Christian nationalism. We've seen just how dangerous this message is to our society. We've watched as this kind of ideology, especially throughout the pandemic, has been truly in opposition to the teachings of Jesus. It really gives a new meaning to what would Jesus do. So with all this baggage, it's completely understandable that we might try to run and hide from some of these words: God, faith, prayer, worship, probably others that I'm forgetting. But in my opinion, if we do this, we let everyone else control the narrative. We don't make room for liberal religion to have a voice at all in any of these concepts, especially in regards to faith, hope, love, justice. And we surely have something to say in this conversation. I've heard again and again over the past few months about how you as a congregation have transformed from a place of refuge for other like-minded people to kind of hide from all of this to a beacon, a place for a theology of liberation and for justice to thrive, a place that draws other people in, that offers an answer to the oft-repeated question, what can we do? And I think this is how we change hearts, how we inspire people, how we lead in love. This is what it means to have faith, to give our hearts to a world we hope to create. The poem that Steve read us earlier, First Lesson, is one of my favorites. There is a gentleness, a tenderness that flows through the images. And I think it makes you feel the way faith feels, to know that you're somehow held in the face of danger. Floating like that, you're not hunched inward the way we usually hold our bodies, but you're open-hearted, casting your arms out wide, and you can feel yourself floating. This is the uncomfortable nature of faith. It requires us to be fully open in order to feel ourselves floating upon the waves that also know how to speak the language of our own hearts. May it be so. Amen. I invite us to rise either in body or in spirit and join in singing hymn number 108, My Life Flows On, an Endless Song.
My life flows on in endless song above earth's lamentation. I hear the real, the far-off hymn that hails a new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear the music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? What though the tempest round me roars? I know the truth it liveth. What though the darkness round me close? Songs in the night it giveth. No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that rock I'm clinging. Since love prevails in heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing? When tyrants tremble as they hear the bells of freedom ringing, when friends rejoice both far and near, how can I keep from singing? To prison cell and dungeon foul, our thoughts to them are winging. When friends by shame are undefiled, how can I keep from singing?
We extinguish the flame of our chalice, but not our mission to welcome radically, love boldly, grow spiritually, and serve courageously. This we do because we envision a beloved community filled with compassion, helping all to thrive in a just world. So friends, as we go forth from our time together this morning, I hope you'll keep your hearts open to the faith that's like the waves, holding us whether we know it or not. Go in peace.